I'm gonna wait for a little bit to get started on time. Gonna give us like maybe one more minute and then I'll get started. Okay. Um, Hello, welcome everyone. I'm just gonna get going, and if more people join us, that'd be even better. So my name is Karina. If anyone's ever joined us before, I know it says Carrie at the bottom, and she does do some of these, but my name is not Carrie, it's Karina. And today we're going to talk about back to school screen time tips. So as I introduce myself a little bit here, feel free to tell us in the chat if you have kids, if you're a teacher or a parent, introduce yourself a little bit. Um, and what ages your kids are if you have some kids, or what ages you care about the most. And of course, any questions you have as I'm talking. So just for anybody who has not joined one of our webinars before, this is Digital Respons-Ability. We were founded in 2016, and we teach digital citizenship to kids, parents, teachers, and all kinds of stuff. I won't dwell on it a lot. As I mentioned, my name is Karina. I'm the operations director here at Digital Respons-Ability, and this is my family. My son is 6.5. So obviously we've had to tackle this conversation about screen time many, many, many times. And it constantly changes, which is one of the reasons that we've actually done multiple webinars about this topic before, but specifically the reason I wanted to talk about back to school screen time is that just a different season in life. And we always have to kind of, when we're talking about screen time or limits or rules, we always have to think about like how we need to make adjustments, how things are going to be different, because they just are. That's just how all life is. And it's okay to make switches or changes in your plans. It's not big deal at all. That's kind of the point. So I guess I forgot to fill out that slide. Sorry, just realized that. So we're going to talk about a few different things. Sorry, guess it will be a surprise because I didn't write out the itinerary. So the first question I have for anyone listening is, what are your biggest fears around screen time? Anybody have something that they're wanted to share that is kind of their biggest stressor or fear or things they're worried about the most? Okay, safety. Thanks, Alexandra. Safety is a big one. I'll be honest, I talk more about methods in dealing with screen time, but we can try to touch on that a little bit. Some of our previous screen time ones focused more on safety, so I didn't want to be repetitive, but I will definitely try to touch on it a little bit. Anyone else have any other concerns or things that they're worried about? Anything that they're like their biggest thing that they care the most about? That's fine. If you have something, you can always put it in the chat. If there's something you think about. The next question is, how do you talk to your kids about technology? Is there a specific way that you talk to them? Obviously, this would be dependent on different ages. Of course, how I talk to my son even now when he's only 6 is different than when he was little. But think about this as we're talking about different ways that we could potentially do stuff. Okay, Lucy, thank you. How much and term effects of screen time? Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit. I will tell you, I don't give you set rules except for AP. I'll go over the APA guidelines a little bit, just because that's going to vary for each kid. Jill, thank you for that. I don't want to get distracted by every comment, but I want to make sure that we address some of your concerns. And that is exactly why I'm talking about this topic today. Just that you're constantly battling it. Honestly, I feel the same way sometimes. And we're going to talk about tips to help you manage screen time, but I'm sure many of you have experienced that sometimes the hardest part is that you could have all kinds of ideas or tips or tricks or whatever, and then you don't have a partner who's on board. My husband loves to watch TV or play video games, so it's really difficult to try to enforce any kind of screen time rules if you have someone who always wants some kind of technology on. So we're not going to address that either. But the main thing I want you guys to take away from this is to think about to be okay with the fact that you can make rules, but that you're going to always be readdressing them and you're always going to have to adjust. And that might sound exhausting, but the point is to just not beat yourself up about it. Just realize that there are going to be different phases in your life and different times and different like exceptions to every rule. And that's just, I mean, we all know that if we're parents, that's just how parenting is. And different kids will need different rules and different limits and different boundaries. So I'm going to do a quick little background about developing brains and technology. Some of this has been talked about before. So if you have younger children, you know that kids just love devices. They always want to be on something. And that's obviously very popular. Television, of course, was big when I was a kid, and we could watch hours of television and no one ever seemed to care. But now, as we have other devices, we're realizing that people worry more about it, right? I don't know how often our parents cared about how much TV we watch, but people definitely care about how much screen time kids are using right now. And that's not a bad thing. We should care. We should be paying attention to what our kids are doing. But one thing about screen time that we have to keep in mind is that it's different for every kid. Like the way kids are using devices are different, right? So if you look at this slide, it says, television is most common for little kids. I don't know how accurate that is even now. I think this is a few years old, because I feel like more and more just using tablets and phones from parents. But tablet use jumps significantly from 3 to 4, and then from 3 to 8. And then a lot of times kids are just using smartphones, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing all the time, but of course you want to try to limit some stuff. So because everybody knows that there's more kids using devices, there are more and more apps targeted to them. I'm sure we've all experienced this. There's games, there's ads, there's things trying to sell your kids on stuff. My son, his number one favorite thing to do at any time he has screen time is to watch YouTube, which makes me insane. However, he's not really watching dumb videos. He's mostly super obsessed with soccer, so that's all he's watching. He's watching soccer replays. So I still don't let it be unlimited, but at the same time, it's better than some of those dumb things that are out there. So obviously, it's important for us as parents to try to pay attention to what our kids are watching and what apps they're doing. I mean, there's technology everywhere. We were just at a restaurant the other day that had one of those little screen things on it with games, and my son started clicking on it, and I was like, don't click on it. It costs money. And my husband's like, no, it doesn't. It didn't ask me to pay for anything. I'm like, no, they do. And of course, he asked the server when he came up, and of course, they do. But they're just instantly gravitated towards screens because that's what they're conditioned to now, and what is associated with fun and joy. So one thing to keep in mind is that children under 3 struggle to transfer knowledge from screen to real life. So what that means is that they might play some educational games, and that's okay. It doesn't hurt anything, but at the same time, they generally have a pretty hard time of transferring that information into real life. So again, it doesn't hurt anything to have something educational, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to come away with that information or knowledge. And it's really not the end of the world. The other thing is that generally children learn from being talked to. They learn from language. Like I said, passive communication, passive things like watching TV, watching tablets, watching cell phones, don't really teach language or a lot of other things. They learn that from the interactions with you. It doesn't mean that you have to ban all screens forever, or even like a certain age, but you do want to just realize that we're going to talk a little bit about passive versus active screen time, and the reality is for under 3, it's pretty much all the same in terms of how they process that information. So one important thing that we're going to kind of talk about is that children need to learn how to self-regulate. It's really hard. It's really hard as a parent to give kids, and especially as they get older, more I guess independence. And of course, when kids are younger, you want to be guiding them and paying attention to their screen time. But as they get older and older, they're going to be consistently interacting, not just on screens, but in school and in real life. And so teaching your kids how to regulate, or kind of regulate their emotions, be in tune with their emotions, understand what they're consuming, that's a really big one when we talk about screen time. Or apps, right? Obviously, there's lots and lots of studies about social media, but even just apps or YouTube, for example, or watching something, if something doesn't make them feel very good, that they need to be able to recognize that so that they can realize that they have a choice. We teach in schools a lot in person, and one of the things I always try to tell kids, not the littles, they don't really understand, but as they get a little bit older, still even elementary school, I'm always trying to tell them, to pay attention to how they feel when they're watching something or playing a game. And I try to emphasize the fact that they don't have to stay watching something. Like they don't have to stay consuming something. Yes, of course, when you're with friends, it's harder to walk away or to ask to change to a different game or a different movie or whatever. Um, but I usually example of like how many movies are on YouTube, how many things are on Netflix. There's always other choices. You don't have to keep consuming or watching something or playing a game if you don't like it. It doesn't have to be bad, but it could just be something you don't enjoy. And why waste the time and energy on it? Really try to emphasize that they have choices, and I think that's really important as they learn how to become more independent, because you're not going to be with them all the time. Unfortunately, we can't just follow our kids around and put them in a little bubble. They have to be able to understand their emotions and know how they're feeling and what how something impacts them on their own. And obviously that's a process. So one way that kids can help, or a few ways that kids can help self-regulate or learn how to, is praise them for staying on task, break down things into smaller chunks so that they have a way to kind of help themselves, encourage them to make their own choices. Obviously, some choices that they can't make. A lot of times when I give my son choices, he'll say, well, I want to do this instead. I'm like, no, that's not the choice. You've got two choices. That's it. You can't do anything else. Obviously, play games with them, watch how they're reacting, and try to help talk them or coach them through something. Um, and try to coach them through like how like rules and things like this example of, do we put, chocolate pudding on the tablet? Hopefully they all say no. But if not, explain why you would not, right? Sometimes we instantly yell at our kids for doing something, like if they did start trying to put chocolate, or if they leave a tablet on the ground and don't pay attention, and we just say don't leave it there and we yell at them. But the reality is it might not have occurred to them that it's fragile, or they're little kids. Obviously older kids know better, but they might not have even realized that it's fragile. So talking to them and making sure that they understand something that we just assume or take for granted is also really important. Okay, so I'm just gonna not spend a lot of time on this, but kids, they're like, it's called magical thinking, but by the time a child is 6, their brain is about 90% of an adult size. So despite that, there's still a lot of learning and things going on. When they're around 8 is when their brain starts maturing and they can have a better idea. So basically, the magic thinking is kind of happening more before 7, that they don't really understand reality as much, and it's a lot more imagination driven. So why this is important when we're talking about technology is that kids can't always differentiate between what they're seeing on the screen and what's real. They don't get sometimes sarcasm. They don't understand that the violence isn't real. The ability to understand what's real and what fake doesn't really form. And so one way you can help regulate this is to utilize filters and controls, regularly talk to your kids, and kind of clarify. Like I mentioned already, my son loves to watch YouTube, and that's the number one thing we have to bring up again. It's like, just because it's on YouTube does not mean it's true. And I realize we all kind of know this, hopefully, but you'd be surprised about how many adults don't realize that concept either. I have an aunt and uncle who are well past retirement age who decided to randomly build a house in the middle of nowhere because my uncle watched hundreds of videos about people building the house that way. And it's been a year and they're not even close to being done. And I said, like, people have asked him, what have you learned from this experience? And he said that just because you see people do it on YouTube doesn't mean you can. And I'm like, my elementary kids know this. I'm not sure how it took you this long to figure it out, but we're all human, and that's just kind of life. Okay, so what devices do you see students or kids using consistently? I imagine it's the normal, like smartphone, tablet, computers, obviously. People sometimes have the smartwatches now. I don't know if there's anything else. Xbox, yeah, sorry, forgot gaming consoles. um, Always computers. Even in school, they're using computers now, right? So you can't regulate it as much as you would like, and they have access. I don't know if there's anything else. That's probably all of them. I guess some people might have e-readers. Yeah, most homework is done on the computer now. And again, that's not something we can really control because unless I guess we homeschool or go to a school that's 100% anti-technology, but I don't know that they exist. But we're going to talk, like I said, a little bit about passive versus active screen time. And so I think one of the important things for us to realize, as scary as excessive screen time use is, or as worked up as we can get as parents about it, learning something at school on a computer is not going to harm someone. Of course, there are studies about you can learn better in person and things, and hopefully schools are being careful about how much time kids are spending doing those kinds of things. But there's a big difference between passively playing video games versus doing something that's educational. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and talk about some strategies for screens. So somebody asked a little bit about safety and a little bit about time and limits and stuff like that. So first of all, these are the APA guidelines for younger children, which is babies and toddlers shouldn't really have screen time under 18 months or limit interaction. I mean, honestly, I don't know who's perfect about this, probably no one. My son, while I didn't let him, I tried really hard to be that parent that didn't just give him the phone when we were at dinner so that he wouldn't bother us, but he still, he still watched stuff. He still did things with us and with friends and family. So it's going to happen. Preschoolers, educational TV is okay. But there's not a lot of research. Like we talked about already, they don't really process or assimilate anything. 6+ is when they're more independent, right? Even between the preschool to 6 age, which is, roughly around when kindergarten starts, 5 and 6. Before my son could read, he knew how to turn on Netflix and YouTube because we had a smart TV and there's a button. He knew what the logos were, right? He didn't have to know that it said YouTube or Netflix. He knew. So of course, trying to stay on top of that and having the conversations about permission and all of that, that's more important as they're younger. Once you give kids their own devices, you should be setting up some rules, but at the same time, the older they get, it's obviously a lot harder to regulate. If they have their own cell phone as teenagers, it can be a lot harder. So here's a couple of tips so that was like the younger kids. So here's a couple of tips for tweens, which, I guess it's relative what that age is. But paying attention to the biggest things happening with them is trust between you and them. They also have to worry about self-care, responsibilities, safety. As Alexandra mentioned, that's a huge thing, being safe online, and friends. So, a couple of these things, obviously talking about safety, if they're tweens, hopefully they're not interacting with people that they don't know yet. Hopefully, even if they have a phone, whether you allow them to be on social media or not, hopefully that they understand how to be private, how to block people, how to even playing games. Like I would really encourage kids who are the elementary age to not be, interacting with people they don't know. Of course, games, you can connect with friends and stuff like that, but just be very, what's the right word? I don't know, discriminate about who you're letting them talk to or add, or, explaining why to. Don't just say, hey, don't talk to people, right? Because of course, all kids are going to do the opposite of what you tell them to do. So trying to encourage them why, like, it's really, you really shouldn't be talking to people you don't know. And if people are approaching you or trying to talk to you, whether that's on a video game or if by chance they have social media, then, encourage them to block, report, and all of those things. For teens, which obviously the next step up, the things they care about or that are important to worry about are relationships, self-care. They want to be able to contribute. They want to create things and post things. Obviously, still safety, monitoring moods and mental health, and having some sense of independence. So, with relationships, one important thing for parents that they can do for teenagers, and obviously anybody who has a relationship, is understanding healthy communication. There are times where, teenage girls or boys will, send appropriate things or ask for inappropriate things. So helping them understand that they shouldn't be doing something that makes them uncomfortable or trying to please a partner, like that's really important. Also with their contribution, they are at the age at that point where they want to do things online. And again, there's obviously no specific rules, but you as a parent, hopefully you've encouraged your kids to pay attention to what's real and not real, or what's safe and not safe, and that they're not just jumping in head first. One of the reasons that we talk about tech use so much in our business is that, as everyone's mentioned, the screens are here to stay. Technology is here to stay. So while we could possibly encourage them not to be on social media or not to put themselves out there in a public space, the reality is it's in their lives all the time, every day. So trying to completely ban them from every interaction is generally not going to work. They'll probably just find other ways that you don't know about. So it's always better to try to create a healthy relationship and healthy dialogue with them. Okay, so the biggest thing that we're going to talk about is building a digital game plan. So, what are your tech routines, habits, and rules at home? Does anybody have any that they want to share, or things that they've tried, maybe that have worked or not worked? Take a drink real fast. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what I've done. I understand that since my son's 6, this might not apply to people who have older kids like Jill, but I'll show you examples of what has worked and what hasn't always worked for us. But one question to ask yourself is, are your family's interactions age appropriate, interactive or passive, and set for privacy? So obviously when you're dealing with kids and screen use, privacy is really important. That will help with the safety question. Again, whether something's passive or active or interactive, that's really important. There's a big difference between someone doing homework or even learning module things like Lexia on their computer as a kid versus just passively scrolling on social media, passively watching something. I mean, we all need a good, Netflix and binge, but it doesn't mean that we need to be doing that all the time. And definitely kids need to learn how to regulate a little bit about that. So here, it's good. So one of the biggest things I want to mention is it's good to have goals and be aware of what your children are consuming, but also don't beat yourself up about it, because none of us are ever going to be perfect. And they're always, like I mentioned at the beginning, they're always going to change. You're always going to have to stop and readdress, make sure you know what's working for you, what doesn't. And again, it's not going to be the same for every kid. Years ago, I taught at a parent night, and a parent told me how one of their kids, they followed the rules, everything was fine, and they had some pretty strict guidelines about how much screen time they could use. They couldn't have social media, all these different things. But one of her daughters would just get super anxious by reading the news, like on the news app. It would just make her super, super anxious. And so she had to delete it from her phone, because she would read like, an earthquake, like in Morocco, sadly, and it would keep her up all night, and she would just toss and turn and like be stressed for weeks about something that happened in the world. So, and she was younger, like maybe 12 or 13. So of course it's good to have kids who are educated and who want to learn, but if it's something that's creating a problem for them, even if it seems not like dangerous, like just, the news, obviously trying to create a way to set some healthy boundaries is important, and that will look different for every kid. So keep in mind, not all screen time is created equal. Like I've mentioned multiple times, there's a difference between active and passive. Allowing increased screen time for whatever reason is not going to be the end of the world. Of course, setting limits is good, and paying attention is good, but at the end of the day, there's going to always be exceptions, like I've mentioned. And creating screen time rules is always it's going to be a constant process. It's not going to end. You're going to constantly readjusting, not just with different ages, but like we mentioned, if you get a new device in your house, or you start school and the things that you kind of let lapse during summer because they were driving you crazy is going to have to change as you go into the school year. So it's okay to have different rules for different days of the week, different periods of life. When you travel, it might be a different rule than when you're at home. Over a break or on the weekend might be a different rule than a school day. It's okay to have these different limits. It's also okay to revise and keep revising and having those conversations. Obviously, kids don't like it when you change the rules on them. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for them and also talk to them about it. Just say, hey, you're a couple of years ago, my son would wake up so incredibly early, and my husband and I never wanted to get up. And so we started letting him for like maybe a month, like watching TV in the mornings before we woke up because we were just so tired. And obviously, what did that do? That did the wrong thing. Sure, it let us sleep for maybe an extra 20 minutes, but he started getting up earlier and earlier because that's all he wanted to do. So obviously, we had to nip that in the bud, and that was 100% on us, just being so tired, quite honestly. But that didn't really solve anything. So here's some other steps. Focus on things that interest your child. When you're trying to encourage healthy screen time, try to encourage them to do things that are interesting. What I mean by that is if they're just passively scrolling or watching YouTube because they don't want to get up and play or whatever, that's not necessarily teaching them anything, right? But if they're actively watching something that's teaching them a skill, or like even if they're just like video games or like music, like in engaging with something that they actually care about will actually make the screen time more effective or not as damaging, essentially. The other part is realize, or the next kind of advice is realize that everyone needs downtime. So while we get really worked up about how much time we spend online, and we should be caring and pay attention, like I mentioned, all of us have had times where we've just wanted to watch an entire season of something on Netflix. And while we want to obviously pay attention to what our kids are consuming, like realize that there are kind of be days or periods where they're just going to want to spend some time watching a couple movies or playing some games. And it really, we all need that downtime sometimes. And then, like I said, think about what the purpose is. Is it just playing video games by themselves in their dark room for hours? Or are they actually playing with their friends? Is it a social connection? Are they playing with their family? Are they doing something that's actually still exercising their social skills, still kind of doing stuff? All of that is a little bit different than passively just watching YouTube, or passively even just playing video games by themselves in their room is a lot different than playing with other people. A lot of kids, that's the only way they connect, right? Is by chatting online or FaceTiming each other or playing video games together. So we don't want to just ban everything just because we're scared. But again, we want to make sure that they're interacting with people that they know, that they're being safe, and paying attention to what they're doing, and not just assuming that they know more than their parents, which they all think, right? And then again, be open to exceptions and adjustments based on needs. So, like I said, things are going to change if you are on a trip, or you're just having a really bad day and you're just going to let your kid, play a video game for more than 30 minutes, whatever. It's really okay. And the most important part is to just make sure that you're not beating yourself up about it, because then you get angry and frustrated and it's really not their fault. Okay, and then allow for adjustments and fun, kind of the same thing. Allow for the fact that there are going to be times where you've set a limit for screen time and your husband comes home and wants to play video games with your kid and they haven't seen each other for like a week. So, pick your battles, I guess. That should be the other part. Pick your battles. Okay, so here's an example of what I made this summer for my child, because he's 6. So obviously, if you have older kids, hopefully you're not micromanaging this much. But I made this checklist for him, the things he had to do before he was allowed any screen time this summer. And this, I think this was last school year. I don't think it was the summer, actually. But I kind of carried it into the summer. Maybe it was. And if you see here, I still have computer time. And when we met, when I say computer time, that's what we call it. That's when he's doing something educational, some program that his school has let him use to learn something, either practicing reading, practicing math, the 2 core subjects. So he used to go through these and he would have to do all these things before I would let him have any screen time at all. So it kind of worked. The biggest problem is that, especially in the summer where you had all day to entertain a kid while I was still trying to work, is that he would blow through this in like 10 minutes. And that was not effective. He'd go, okay, I already played outside. He'd go grab, a broom because he was very literal, and he'd go sweep the kitchen, and then he would, come back. So this was kind of good because it did make him do all of these things, but also not effective because honestly, it never took him more than 30 minutes to work through all of it. So obviously, that was not a long-term solution. So the reason I tell you this is, like I said, all the things I've been saying, sometimes you've just got to do something, realize it's not working, and try to figure out a better system. So I know not everyone has little kids, so I understand it might not all work for you. So when we kind of hit into summer more, I had to break it down by hours. I still use these little graphics because it was easier for him than trying to read everything completely. But I gave him chores in the morning that he had to do. I told him what other things he had to do, kind of as you can see, the same little graphics for the morning part. And then he had to eat. And then he didn't get any screen time until after lunch. And then it was limited. We had a timer set, and he could pick whatever screen time he wanted, whether that was watching something or playing a game or whatever, but he had a limited period of time where he could have some screen time. And then we would do other things. Like he'd have to pick another activity or just go outside or whatever. As I mentioned, he's super into soccer. So if he got bored or didn't want to get up, I'd be like, go play soccer again. And he would. He's pretty good at playing by himself constantly. He plays soccer constantly. So this was what we had to do when this other method didn't really work, because he would blow through the whole list really fast. Hopefully, like I said, if you have older kids, you don't have to micromanage them as much, but encouraging them to set limits for themselves is also really helpful. Most phones track screen time on apps or things like that, right? So having a conversation with them about, okay, we all like to watch TikTok videos or Instagram videos, but ultimately we could spend hours doing that, and what would we accomplish? Are we learning anything? Is that something that's helpful to us? So encouraging them to say, let's make a goal for this week to put a limit of 20 minutes on social media. Both Android phones and iPhones let you set limits per app, and that's something that you shouldn't just like make for them unilaterally, but you should encourage and kind of talk about. We do like smart digital goals when we teach in schools, and the number one thing I do when I'm teaching that isn't say you should do ABC. It's to encourage, like I ask them what they want. Like, what do you want to learn? What do you want from your screen time? What are things that you do? If you don't play video games and you don't care, there's no point in making a rule about your time or what video games you play. Like, you might not ever need to do that. Maybe, and at the same time, you could say, it doesn't have to be a negative. When I talk to kids about these goals, I'll say the positive, you could have it as a positive thing. You could say, instead of saying, I'm only allowed to play video games for 30 minutes a day or an hour on the weekends or whatever it may be, encourage them to do something educational or informative or more active first. Like, I'm going to, watch this documentary about, sea life because they're super obsessed and want to become a marine biologist, right? Some way to encourage something before you give yourself some passive screen time. So going back to my son's schedule, I went back to this model for the school year. And that's kind of why I thought about doing this webinar, is because I had to kind of readjust again. And I didn't break down the time just because we're so busy all the time, right? Every day of the week is different. Some days we have soccer practice, some days whatever. So instead of breaking it down by time, I put kind of a checklist again, that all of these things have to be completed before he earns screen time. And quite honestly, most of the time during the week, he doesn't. Not because he's not doing these things, but because there's too many other things happening. We have to do other things, and he has to get through all of these things before he's allowed any amount of screen time, specifically on the weekdays. So most of the time he doesn't, quite honestly. We just don't have time. We're busy, and as most people are, and he doesn't get there. So those are just kind of some of the examples of things that I did. Obviously, if you have older kids, that's not going to apply. But one thing to keep in mind, no matter the age group, is just to aim for balance. Again, as your kids get older, you want to be bringing them into these conversations. You setting rules for them is not going to get you anywhere. They're never going to be happy if you're just giving them, trying to be the enforcer. But talking to them about what they want for themselves in their lives, of course, especially middle school age, they're usually sarcastic and say, we don't care if we watch YouTube all day long. I get it. Or TikTok or whatever. But aiming for balance is really important. And helping them kind of see why it's important will be helpful. So a couple of things we should all accept is that technology is here to stay. Technology can be empowering, and there are things that we can do, we can learn in fun and engaging ways. There's a lot of things on the internet that are good. Yes, safety is an issue when you have kids and they have their own devices or access. Even if you haven't given them a phone or a tablet yet, they usually have access somewhere, whether it's with you or a friend or relative, babysitter, whatever, they're going to have access somewhere. So try to focus on the fact that not all technology or all internet or screen time is bad or negative. Like, show them that there's lots of things you can learn on the internet. There's lots of things you can access that are not necessarily negative. And staying connected, that's a huge thing. Obviously, we've all been through COVID, and that was a really fundamental part of our lives, staying connected somehow. So again, technology is not going to go anywhere. We're using it constantly every day. So encouraging your kids to spend the time doing things that are helpful or appropriate versus not is really important. And then of course, again, like people have mentioned, we do homework on the computer, and that's also not going to probably change. It's probably just going to get more and more, right? Going to work, you have to use it. I mean, years ago, I had a friend working at Target, and they didn't even, like, they just use their phones now to look anything up. They're not like, there's not separate devices, right? They just use the app from Target and on their phone. So even as teenagers, even if you don't want them on social media or they decide not to be, they're going to use technology and devices and screens all the time, especially as they get older and get jobs and go to college and all of that. So here's a couple of tips of things that you can do. So one is setting expectations. You could, like I said, this kind of just progresses as kids get older, right? You can't micromanage them as much, but hopefully you're having the conversations where you're not just setting expectations of you saying you get 10 minutes of screen time for every 10 minutes reading, like this one. Hopefully that's not coming directly only from you with zero conversation. But it is okay to have some rules, right? Are screens allowed at your table? Like if you're eating dinner or while you're eating dinner, are screens allowed in bedrooms? Like I said, it's really easy, especially if you have kids, no matter what age. If you're trying to go out to eat and you're trying to have an adult conversation and you want them to stop bugging you, it's really easy to say, here, take my phone, or get out your phone if we don't care, bring your Switch, or whatever it is. And there's no judgment for me at all if that's what you do. You need some sanity by having some adult time, but you can't leave your kid at home by themselves. It's fine. But one of the reasons I've tried so hard to stay away from that is because, as I mentioned at the beginning, my husband loves to watch TV and play video games. And so screens are on a lot, even if I'm regulating my sons. And so when we go out to eat, I don't let anybody have screens. And I just I've tried really hard to not set the precedent that we're going to use that as a way for him to stop bugging me. We'll play with him. He loves to play tic-tac-toe a million times, which gets so boring. But at least he's not just watching YouTube on my phone. So another thing to talk about with older kids is to pause for people, to teach them how to interact with people, even if they are playing a video game. Talk about how they interact, how they talk, how they're connecting. So again, we're back to not like active versus passive, right? Making eye contact, communicating directly with someone is always important, regardless of whether you're on a video or online or talking to them in person. And practicing communication skills is really important. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there who are introverts, and kids are introverts as well, but they need to learn how to interact with other people. That's just kind of, life. So again, trying to help them practice, communicate, even communication with phones. If they're old enough to have their own phone and all of their communication is with their friends, like texting. Think about it this way. When I was a kid, I just spent hours writing notes to my friends, or it's not really any different. Their texting is the same. So we get really stressed about screen time, but the reality is think about how many times you pick up your phone in the day. How many times are you using your phone, not just to like aimlessly scroll through, TikTok or Instagram. A lot of times you're doing important things. You're answering people, you're using Google Maps to get somewhere, you're, pulling up an app to order dinner or whatever it is. So don't be so hard on your kids either for using their phones for a variety of reasons, because we all kind of do at this point. And just kind of emphasize that you can communicate, while gaming through online platforms and things like that. Again, it's a social thing. So of course, hopefully people aren't in their rooms only talking to people online all of the time. Hopefully they're getting out a little bit or practicing these skills. But at the end of the day, kids can get social anxiety and can be stressed, and the easiest way for them to connect with someone that they have something in common with is online. So here's a couple of nighttime strategies. Understanding how blue light affects us. That's kind of why screens or phones kind of do the dark mode now, or have that option, right? Because there's been lots of studies about how blue light affects our sleep. Teenagers specifically need a lot of sleep. That's just growth development. If they don't get enough sleep, their brains don't develop in the way that they should. So understanding how that works and making sure that the settings, I have on my settings that my nighttime is at 9, and from like 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. People always ask, like, what apps should you use for filters, or what things to like monitoring, and there's a lot of options out there, so we generally don't focus on any one thing, but there's a lot of choices on your phones now as well, like setting do not disturb for a certain time. Like teaching your kids these things is really important. Like I said, setting limits on certain apps, setting limits on when you be awake and when you get notifications. All of those are just tools that are already built into a lot of phones now. And if you show your kids how to do them, of course you can't force them unless you take their phones away. But it's also important for them to understand, again, like, okay, try to reason with them. Like, yes, it's really fun chatting with my friend through text for, 10 hours as a girl. But at the same time, I have to go to sleep. It's okay to not respond to something. The text will still be there in the morning, right? Talking them through and helping them come to the same conclusion is really helpful. Know how many hours your child needs. And then there's of course digital things that you could do. So maybe if your kid really, really wants to read something, or play something, you do it together for a few minutes before there's bedtime, like kind of create some kind of compromise. And the most important thing is just modeling healthy behavior for them. If you're telling your kids that they can't, like if it's a kid old enough to have their own device or phone, and you're telling them you should be putting your phone to bed at night, or you shouldn't be texting people after 8, or whatever your rule that you're trying to enforce, if you're not doing that, if you're telling them that as you're sitting there holding your phone, that's not really going to be very effective. If you're always looking down at your phone, like I said, for things that are even valid, like answering a work email, or texting your spouse before they come home, those are all valid things. But if you're not sending the same limits that you're at, not the same limits, but if you're not setting some limits, if you're not discussing why you are or not putting certain limits in your life, they're never going to get there on their own. They're never going to be able to make those choices well on their own if you're not putting those limits out there, or explaining why you might, the same things don't apply. Like, not in a sarcastic way, but you can say, hey, I have to work. That's why I'm doing this right now, versus you have to get up super early. If you spend, too much time texting someone, you're not going to do that. So having those conversations and also differentiating the reasons why different rules apply for different situations is really important. So I've talked about this a few times already, but quality versus quantity. What do you guys feel is quality screen time? What would fall under that category? Research, yeah. Homework, those are things we can't really prevent them from doing, right? I mean, even if any of us had some old school Encyclopedia Britannica sitting around, it's probably not very updated or accurate at this point, right? You're going to have ways to research stuff. And like I mentioned, there's lots of information on the internet. Yes, some of it's disinformation. We won't touch that. But there's lots and lots of information. So the reality is that they're going to need to be able to find information and know what's real and what's not. So they're going to be using computers or phones or whatever. Homework, obviously, like I said, like we've said already, that's pretty unavoidable as well. There's not a lot we can do with banning screens and homework at the same time. So what you really want to focus on when you're talking about screens, especially as your kids get older and less about the little kids that I, have talked about with my son, is focusing on quality versus quantity. And then the other way to look at this is consumption versus creation. If you're actively doing something or creating something, that's a completely different impact versus just, like I said, passively scrolling through something. So this is a very long quote. Let me try to read it quickly. Or kind of paraphrase it. I won't read the whole thing. It's crucial to value the entire spectrum of participation and the extent to which even modest participation can lead to opportunities for identity exploration, learning, and cultivating a sense of belonging or community. Additionally, what may seem as mundane participation in isolation, such as sharing a video on TikTok or a comment on Instagram, can potentially over time have a societal effect. So it's just important for us to note that we have to move away from the normal thinking we have that all online participation is negative or bad, and consider things that it's more complex. I know I just kind of paraphrased that. So here's kind of the consumers versus creators and the spectrum. Okay, so consumers, obviously watching YouTube, watching TikTok, just watching TV, scrolling through a feed, playing a game by yourself, even just reading online articles. You might be learning something, but you're just consuming that information. You're not really doing anything else with it. You're not interacting. You're not having some kind of relationship, I guess. It's probably the wrong word for digital things, but you're not doing anything. There's no give and take. Prosumers are kind of the in between. They are interacting. So again, there's many studies about kids and teens and social media, but there's a difference between aimlessly scrolling and participating. Like a lot of times too, parents get worked up, especially for teenagers, about they're just all hanging out and all they're doing is looking at their phones, right? And of course, again, you want to encourage them to have some social skills, but at the same time, think about when you were a kid. Obviously, this could be like more like some kids or other, but a lot of times you'd sit around and flip through magazines and share things and take silly quizzes. Like that's their equivalent now. So of course you can talk again about healthy screen time and limits and healthy interactions and mental health when it comes to what you're consuming online. But the reality is that what they're doing isn't a whole lot different than what we did as kids. So reading and commenting on an article, posting on a message board, commenting on videos, commenting on live streams, those are all prosumers, which is that they're consuming some content, but they're also interacting with it in some way. And then creators are, people who are writing and sharing things, playing a game with family and friends, writing an article, creating their own videos, sharing art you made. Obviously, how much you allow your kids to be creators is a personal decision. Of course, you can't really control them once they get into college or don't live with you or anything like that. But depending on the kid, it might be something that gives them an outlet. So if I were to allow my son to be a creator, I mean, he always asks to be a YouTuber and I say no because I don't want to deal with it. But I would just be really careful about what that looks like. If they want to be someone who creates YouTube and you're okay with it, there's really nothing that we can say or that I'll say to you or anything like that. But at the same time, if it's someone who really likes the act of creating but doesn't really need to open themselves up to like the entire internet, that's okay too. They could, be creating things and just be private and not let everybody have access. That's, you kind of know your kids the best and what they can handle or not handle. And again, it goes back to the same things of you might think it's okay, they might assure you it's okay, and you might want to be a supportive parent and say, okay, let's go ahead and, start a YouTube channel or TikToks or whatever, and then realize, this is having a negative effect. We're going to have to switch this up a little bit. It's okay to change your mind. I know kids never like it, but that doesn't mean that you don't have that right as a parent. So does anybody know of any other examples of any of these things? Consumer, prosumer, or creator? That's a weird word, prosumer. I think I kind of went over most of them. So that's really the last thing for me to talk about. I know we talked about safety a little, or Alexandra had asked about safety a little bit. I don't have this slide in this presentation, but one thing that you want to always think about when you're worried about your kids and safety is just look for changes, like pay attention to their mental health. For teenagers especially, if something's changed, if they become more reserved or they're spending a lot of time online with no regulation, all of those are kind of red flags. They might be interacting or doing something online. Okay, Jill, good question. How do you stay neutral instead of becoming judgmental about screen use? I think the main thing would be asking yourself how much screen time do you use, right? That's kind of how I stay unjudgmental. Like for example, like I mentioned already, my husband loves to watch TV and I can't stand it. Well, I like to watch TV too, right? There are times where I just spend the whole day watching TV, Netflix when I'm alone, right? But at the same time, like I don't want that to be the case all the time, and I don't want the modeling, right? So I think what I'm trying to say is that it's okay to try to look at it from someone else's perspective. Like for me, I work an office job where I spend 90% of my time on a computer. And so I sometimes want to just veg and watch Netflix, but most of the time I don't want to be anywhere near a screen. I just want to read a normal book or do something else. At the same time, I love to read. And so while I like reading normal books, a lot of times I have like 5 books downloaded on my phone. And when I'm waiting in line or doing something where I can't, like I'm stuck somewhere, I'm always reading on my phone. And I'm sure if somebody looked at me, they would think I was just scrolling or like never looking up or not communicating with someone when really I'm just reading a book. So I think the most important part about being non-judgmental is just looking at it from someone else's perspective. Like, what are they doing? Not that it's your business to grill everybody, but of course it's your business to grill your kids, right? So what are they doing? What actually are they doing online? Are they spending excessive amount of time texting someone? And what are they getting from it, I guess? I mean, I'm in my 40s and I text my best friend all day long throughout the day. Not constantly, because I have things to do and obligations, but she lives in Hawaii and it's a 4-hour time difference. We have no time to talk on the phone. So we text all day long, and that helps us stay sane throughout the day. So we don't want to begrudge our kids the same ability that we have to do things, I guess. But of course, we again want to try to help them get there to making the right choices. I don't know if that answered. I'm sorry, that was kind of long-winded. I'm gonna, since we're almost out of time, I'm gonna show you. Sorry, that was like a lot of information. I'm gonna put this link here. Next month, we're not doing our traditional one through us, but Carrie, who is our CEO, she's doing this with this organization called Niche Academy. So if you're interested in learning about digital citizenship in libraries, you can register at this link here. And then here's our contact information. If you have any questions or anything like that, we send out newsletters every like a couple of times a month with just like replays. Everyone attending and anyone who registered will always get a replay of this, as well as like blogs and things like that. So we try to constantly give you guys some tips. It's all free. There's no charge or anything. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to throw them into the chat, but otherwise I won't keep you if you have other stuff to go. We all always have a lot to do, I know. So feel free to throw anything in there and I'll wait for a couple minutes, but feel free to leave if you need to. And it was great for your interaction. I really appreciate it. Couple people still here. Any other lingering questions? Maybe they just walked away. It's fine. No judgment. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end. But again, feel free to email us or contact us if you have any questions or there's anything that we can help you with. We're more than happy to help. Thank you.